post that I published today. I want to share that, talk through it, see if you've got any questions or comments that we can discuss here in this live format. So this is a post from my site, leanblog.org. And the title here is really more about management than it is about baseball, but it uses a baseball example. When it's easier to distort the system than it is to improve the system. I'm doing a bit of a test. I'm trying to figure out how to record. I will figure that out later. But again, the blog post is when it's easier to distort the system than it is to improve it, using an example of involving baseball attendance. So I'm often reminded of what the late Peter Schultes, management professor, what he would write and say. He was often quoted by the equally legendary W. Edwards Deming, where Schultes basically said there are three things that can happen when there's pressure to meet a goal or a target. And would add two of these three things are bad. Three things can happen. One, distort the numbers. Two, distort the system. Three, this is the only good thing out of the three, we could actually improve the system. So number one and number two, distorting the numbers or distorting the system, are often described using other language, gaming the system, fudging the numbers. I've written a lot of blog posts about this in the context of Schultes and his work. Now, Dr. Deming railed against goals like zero defects. He would probably say some of the same things about zero harm goals. But I think what Deming and Schultes warned about was something particularly dysfunctional, setting a target and then doing nothing as a leader other than demanding results, saying, do whatever it takes, give me results or else, give me results or I'll find someone else who can, things like that. When we have a goal, Dr. Deming would ask, by what method? Because having a method matters, having the right leadership. As the late Paul O'Neill provided, he provided that leadership in the name of zero harm at Alcoa. And he's been very influential with executives in healthcare who are setting zero harm goals. Having the right style of leadership makes all the difference, and it gives people a fighting chance to reach these goals and meaningful targets. I remember a story that Dr. Deming told about a factory where they had a target for reducing injuries. I don't know if it was set as a goal of zero, but there were definitely financial incentives that were dangled in front of people. Well, the answer was easy, or at least the easiest thing to do, dysfunctional as it is that people stopped reporting injuries, even when people were quite obviously harmed. Part of Dr. Deming's story was seeing people like, their arm in a sling where they were clearly injured. So we don't want to pressure people to distorting the numbers. We don't want them to distort the system. As leaders, we need to set the bar high, or in this case, low, around a goal like zero harm. And then we need to provide systems and leadership to actually get there. Now back to the Schultes framework, where those three things again. When it's easier for people to distort the numbers or to distort the system, they'll do that. And I'd say that's not their fault. When leaders don't help people actually improve the system or don't let them improve the system, that's a management failure. And there are many, many examples. I've blogged about examples looking at Wells Fargo and the VA healthcare system where people fudged the numbers and gamed the system. I would say those employees or those managers who are fudging the numbers and gaming the system, I wouldn't call them unethical. I would say they're part of a broken organizational culture. Again, these are management failures, and it often starts right at the top. So an example of that comes from professional sports, Major League Baseball. And the story that I'm sharing here, anything recent, but I heard about it recently during an episode of the Dan Le Batard Show podcast. His guest, somebody he frequently has on the show, is David Sampson, who is the president of the Miami Marlins, formerly the Florida Marlins, Major League Baseball team. He was president of that team from 2002 to 2017. And the story that he told on the show got written up in an article that I've linked to. You can find this again at my site, leanblog.org, if you read the full article from insider.com. But you can see their headline said, former MLB executive says Commissioner Bud Selig, he was basically the CEO of the sport, worked with teams to rig attendance figures after the steroid scandal. So he was commissioner at the time. Bud Selig wanted to see growth in attendance, more fans in the seats. He wanted MLB to set records each season, and that's his prerogative as a leader. And you could argue it was his responsibility to grow the sport for obvious financial reasons and maybe for his own job performance and or his ego. But again, thinking back to Peter Schultes and the three things that could happen here. Did Bud Selig help Major League Baseball teams improve the system, or did he help them distort the system? Sampson said Selig was distorting. He used the word rigging. You could say fudging or cheating. As David Sampson said, former MLB commissioner Alan Bud Selig had teams give away hundreds of thousands of free tickets to fans. Those tickets were then used to boost overall industry attendance and make baseball look healthier than it was. There's the distortion. He wanted the narrative every year that baseball attendance was increasing, Sampson said. When it came out that attendance was actually not up, he invented something called discretionary tickets. So I'd say this is, back to the Schultes framework, a distortion of the system. They weren't just erasing the numbers and putting in fake numbers. They were distorting the system in a way that was making those numbers look better than they really were. So, if you're trying to increase the number of, pardon the phrase here, butts in seats, that's not the same as paid attendance from a financial perspective. Free tickets, by definition, don't bring in revenue. But if you get people to the game, they'll spend money probably on parking and food and merchandise in a way that's profitable if you actually get people there. So here's the major distortion to the system. The teams in Major League Baseball then counted those quote unquote discretionary tickets toward their total paid attendance figures, even if the tickets were never used. Let that sink in. Free tickets, people not even showing up to use the free ticket, were counted as paid attendance. Now, if you get the old Saturday Night Live dated Mike Myers reference here, it's time for coffee talk. Those tickets were neither paid nor attendance. Discuss amongst yourselves. And we've got the live chat here if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. This is a test to see if the streaming is also working in Facebook. You can post comments or questions in the chat, and I will do my best to address those. So this distortion of the system, it, quote, worked for a while, but that practice has now supposedly stopped. It's been a number of years since Bud Selig was commissioner. But as Insider reports, and I think this is outside of what David Sampson said on the Le Batard show, this distortion was an open secret for a while. In 2005, the Los Angeles Times announced it would stop including MLB attendance figures in their stories because of the discrepancies between attendance figures that teams were reporting and actual attendance at the games. In effect, we're intentionally presenting inaccurate information while attributing it to the home team. Former Los Angeles Times sports editor Bill Dwyer wrote in a memo. They didn't want to be publishing, if you will, fake news that was being provided by the teams or MLB. So after that period of distortion, you would then see bad results that follow when the practice stopped. Let's just leave the problem for the next executive or the next, in this case, commissioner. So if you know me, you would expect me to plot the dots, as my friends in NHS England would say, Samantha Riley in particular. You can look for their use of the hashtag plot the dots on LinkedIn and Twitter. So of course, when I want to look at these numbers over time, I could do a simple run chart of attendance per game numbers. So what's being plotted here, as I scroll up to the chart, is the average attendance per game per season. So this is to adjust for increases in the number of teams, or in some cases, the reduction of games last year because of the pandemic, or the reduced ballpark capacities in a lot of places here in 2021 as ballparks open. So here is a run chart with data that goes back to the 19th century. And you can see there's a clear, at least there had been, a clear upward trend over time. It's maybe a linear increase in the popularity of the game. And again, this growth is not coming from adding more teams or more games per season. This is average attendance per game. So we see a few blips over time that seem to fall outside of that linear growth rate, and I've circled them. This first blip is post-World War II. So, booming economy, increase in leisure time, more people going to baseball games. And then that seemed to have been temporary. So that seems not to have been a distortion in the system or the data. But then here circled these two data points. These were peak steroid era. The seasons in the 90s when there were a lot of home runs being hit. This was actually not the famed Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa summer of chasing the Roger Maris record. So you see this increase and then a drop. And then the years that David Sampson is referring to, using the quote unquote discretionary tickets, or I would call it the fake attendance, we see this upward blip and then attendance drops, flattens out, and has been falling 2018 and 2019. So this is all pre-pandemic. So if anything, it seems like all Bud Selig did as commissioner of Major League Baseball at the time was kind of kick the can down the road. If the growth in attendance had stopped and was going to be flattening out, all he did, it seems, was delay the appearance of that for a couple of years. He didn't really improve the system. He distorted the system, and he was probably rewarded for this quite well financially, even if it was fake results. So again, Bud Selig as CEO, as commissioner of Major League Baseball, he may have conspired to make things look good in the short term, but it was a house of cards, not referring to the St. Louis Cardinals, of course. So here or in any setting, when you fudge the numbers or distort the system, you might get with it for a while, but it always comes back to bite you or catch up with you. So going back to, again, what Peter Schultes says, when there's pressure to hit a target, three things can happen. The two that are bad are distorting the system or distorting the numbers. The third thing, the good thing, actually improving the system, is the only effective long-term strategy. So again, that's my blog post. I kind of wanted to talk through it and read through it in a live streaming format. We see a number of people who have tuned in live and you've said hello in the chat. Thank you for that. I will stay on here for another minute or so. If somebody has a question related to metrics and pressure from leaders, examples of distorting the system or distorting the numbers instead of actually improving the system. We'll see if there are any comments, and if not, I'll go ahead and end the live stream. We can always continue the discussion through comments outside the live stream here. I do want to mention I'm going to be doing a live stream. It's going to be a live streamed episode of my Lean Blog Interviews podcast on July 13th. Katie Anderson is going to be my guest. In fact, I have a recent blog post about that I'll just pull up to show while I'm talking about this. It's going to be the 15th anniversary of my podcast soon. It's going to be the reason, opportunity for Katie and I to talk is that it is coming on the first anniversary of her book, which is called Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn. She's got an audiobook coming out soon, so I want to give a plug for that. So Katie and I are going to be talking about her reflections on what she's learned from Isao Yoshino about lean leadership. What has she learned since the book was written and published? She continues to talk to Mr. Yoshino very frequently. We'll take your live questions. We can talk about what she's learned living in Japan, taking study trips to Japan. We'll talk about all sorts of things. I've got a number of questions lined up, and we'll take your comments. Jose Valdez commented here. Thank you for saying this. He says, very insightful. It's been hard to convince upper management that the metrics or ways of reporting KPIs need to change. So I agree. That's that's a big challenge. Jose, we'll keep fighting that fight together. Thank you for what you're doing and for what you're sharing and commenting on LinkedIn on those topics. Okay, so with that, I will wrap up the live stream. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Thanks.